Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in. My name is Stephen Roecker and I work at the National Soil Survey Center. Today I'd like to share with you some information about the Global Soil Partnership and the several contributions the NRCS has made to the Global Soil Information System, or GLOSIS. In addition, I'd like to discuss some of the challenges my co-authors and I encountered creating continental soil maps. Over the past several years, a flood of new data sets have come online from various organizations and countries, such as Soil Grids, the Global Soil Dataset for use in our system models, the Global Soil Respiration Database, and the Soil Water Infiltration Global Database, just to name a few. Another set of emerging global datasets are those managed by the Global Soil Partnership, which is a collaborative effort facilitated by the Food and Agricultural Organization, or FAO, of the United Nations. The GSP's mission in a lot of ways is similar to the National Cooperative Soil Survey. Unlike the NCSS, the GSP partners with collaborators such as the USDA-NRCS to contribute the best available data for their country to the Global Soil Information System. However, unlike the US's National Soil Information System, GLOSIS is based on a raster format and its main attributes are soil properties. To date, the GSP has developed 1 kilometer global raster maps for soil organic carbon and a series of soil properties necessary to classify salt-affected soils, including pH, electrical conductivity, and exchangeable sodium percentage. This year, new efforts began to create global maps of black soils, which are largely similar to malt soils, and soil organic carbon sequestration. Back in 2018, raster maps of soil organic carbon for the U.S. were developed by rasterizing information from our National Soil Geographic Database, otherwise known as GNATSCO, which is a combination of the Soil Survey Geographic Database, otherwise known as SSURGO, and the State Soil Geographic Database, otherwise known as STATSCO. Up until recently, this was arguably the most practical way to generate national maps. However, in 2020, when the GSP asked member countries to contribute additional soil property maps for their Salt-Affected Soils initiative, the Soil and Plant Sciences Division opted to compare the results from GNATSCO to those generated according to the digital soil mapping guidelines provided by the GSP. Therefore, last year, my co-authors and I developed a series of digital soil maps for pH, EC, ESP, salt-affected soils, and black soils that were developed using a typical suite of environmental covariates, in addition to several GNATSCO derivatives. To compare the accuracy of the DSM and GNATSCO soil property maps, patterns from the NCSS Soil Characterization Database were used as a reference. That accuracy assessment showed that the digital soil maps were consistently more accurate. Therefore, the digital soil maps for pH, EC, ESP, salt-affected soils, and black soils were submitted to GLOSIS. The following slides will provide several examples of our GSP efforts and mapping comparisons. This slide is a bit busy, but it gives you a visual summary of the GSP governance structure and processes for coordinating efforts to produce global soil maps. As you can see, it shares many features with how the NCSS operates nationally. The GSP provides standards and distributes mapping efforts amongst the different countries or continents. Hopefully this slide looks familiar to most people. It lists the different mapping strategies different countries may choose to use, which may depend on a variety of factors, but the choice typically boils down to what type of soil data is available. The bottom figures show a simple illustration of what the digital soil mapping process looks like. The key feature being the reliance on georeferenced soil data or legacy training data to develop predictive models. Within the U.S., we're lucky to have a wealth of legacy data. The NCSS Soil Characterization Database includes over 65,000 laboratory pattern descriptions which date back to the 1950s and includes samples from the Kellogg Soil Survey Laboratory and several land-grant universities. However, as you can see from this map, that data is unevenly distributed. Also, the abundance of data, or lack thereof, is unfortunately much more limited for areas outside of the continental United States, particularly Alaska, considering its size and importance in understanding the soil carbon cycle. This lack of legacy data limits all potential mapping methods we might use. Another factor we have to consider or compensate for is that not all of the data we have is complete. Some data elements are more commonly measured than others, not to mention the variety of different methods that exist for measuring different properties. So we have a foundation of legacy data with which to develop digital soil maps. The next piece of the puzzle is having a variety of geospatial data sets that are correlated with our point observations with which to develop predictive models. Luckily, the GSP provides a variety of global geospatial data sets at a resolution of 1 kilometer. In addition, we have tested the inclusion of several additional variables, including derivatives from GNATSCO and STATSCO. We were particularly interested in exploring ways we could inform our predictive models with the existing soil information embedded in GNATSCO that isn't already captured by other geospatial datasets. So if we skip over some of the nitty-gritty modeling steps, here are the results we got for pH by largely following the GSP's DSM guidelines and rasterizing GNATSCO. As you can see at the scale of CONUS, the results are similar, although small local differences exist. However, for electrical conductivity measured by saturated paste, the differences are more pronounced, particularly in areas such as California where salinity is a major concern. The difference between the digital soil map and GNATSCO likely stem from several factors, such as the sample size, the estimates derived from STATSCO, and EC's skewed distribution. On this slide, I have for you a comparison of maps generated for estimating the distribution of black soils. Generally speaking, black soils are equivalent to mollisols, but they're not the same thing, and they're also broken out into two categories. One of the challenges with constructing an estimate of black soils using GNATSCO was that it required data on soil color, which is not present in GNATSCO. Therefore, the dominant soil color from the official soil series descriptions were used, with the help of Dylan Baudet. One interesting feature of this comparison is that the digital soil map includes more forested areas than the GNATSCO map, albeit a low probability, and has a more diffuse and uncertain prediction. As I mentioned earlier, one of the questions we were originally interested in was which mapping method produced the most accurate map. This slide and the next quickly summarizes some of those results. This figure shows a scatter plots of the predicted pH values versus the training data from the NCSS soil characterization database. What we're hoping to see in a figure like this is a tight cluster of points along the one-to-one diagonal line. Both the digital soil map and GNATSCO seem to do an adequate job, which corresponds with the map we looked at earlier. However, if we look at several accuracy metrics, we get a more objective assessment. In every case, the DSM predictions are higher, and like we saw earlier, the EC predictions from GNATSCO aren't so great. So in summary, I have a few takeaways I'd like to draw your attention to and several recommendations. First point, this project reaffirms previous comparisons between DSM and SERGO, which is why the agency has been investing heavily in DSM and developing new maps using DSM. Second, some soil properties are more accurate than others. This is to be expected and relates to the next 2 points and following recommendations. Many areas lack georeferenced PEDON data, especially areas outside of CONUS. SERGO and STATSCO turned out to be useful DSM covariates. Therefore, we don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And lastly, our soil databases are challenging to use, which shouldn't be a surprise. So how to address these takeaways? My co-authors and I proposed the following recommendations. For starters, since most DSM approaches rely heavily on georeferenced point data, we think we need a national strategy to close the gap in our point data. In addition, we need to start sampling areas at a recurring frequency so that we can capture temporal trends in dynamic soil properties that are known to change, such as salinity, carbon, and moisture. In order to increase the speed of data collection, this will undoubtedly require the use of proximal soil sensing. Second, projects should be prioritized in areas where SERGO diverges significantly from DSM. Third, where point data is lacking and STATSCO is the primary soil dataset, STATSCO should be updated accordingly until enough point data can be gathered. Lastly, we know our soil databases are complicated, but if we're going to increase the speed with which we make maps, soil maps, we need to streamline our databases and tools to make them more efficient. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Thanks for tuning in, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or any of my co-authors. Thanks again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference. Cheers.